Hi, I am Nisha Agarwal, a regional film actress, a full-time mother, and now looking to positively influence my audience by being in conversation with people who have meaningfully impacted my life. So today I am in conversation with a counseling psychologist who works with emotional and behavioral issues across the spectrum, be it in children, adolescents, or adults. I have been very fortunate enough to attend one of her fabulous workshops on parenting. Please welcome Ms. Lajja Sanghavi.
Thank you, Nisha. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Lajja, tell us something about yourself and all the lovely work that you do.
Hi, Nisha. Hello, everyone. I'm a counseling psychologist, and my specialization is in developmental psychology and inner child work, hypnotherapy, and family therapy. So what that essentially means is that I work with emotional and behavioral issues with the individual and families at three different levels. That is thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And this is done with both individuals in the family setup and in the framework of the developing self in the environment. Almost a decade now that I have been working with children, individuals, adults, parents, and families for behavioral and emotional disturbances. The focus of the clinic here is when a client comes with a symptom, it's looked at as not the problem, but just a point of intervention where we start a very deep inner journey with the client. So it's literally like the tip of the iceberg. So if a client comes to me with anger outbursts or anxiety attacks, that's really not the problem. Okay, it's what got the client for therapy, and it's a symptom. It's not a machine, right, that's going conky or faulty. We cannot ignore the entire gamut of experience that the person brings along with him and her. So right from our growing up years, throughout life, our expectations, our disappointments, our unmet needs, our deepest, most vulnerable emotions, how we've dealt with them, the traumas that we've been through, and also the significant people that shaped our lives. All of that impact us. And the symptoms, say anger, is just a manifestation of this entire gamut of experiences and how they've shaped us. I have a team of therapists trained in different therapies and modalities of healing. All of them are non-pharmac, in the sense there's no medication used in any of the treatment. It's just a deep understanding of thoughts, emotions, and actions, and how we have some power over them, how we can understand these. Human beings, we're very wise, we're very intelligent. I mean, look at where we've come from the time of Stone Age till now. We've done brilliantly as a species, and we've been through a lot, and yet we've survived. So it's all about understanding yourself, where you come from, what caused it, and then working with it to shift for the positive. I have these lovely therapists who are helping me with the work that I do. And so I'll just give you a little brief about how I work in a session with a client. When the client comes, first of all, there's phase one of therapy, where literally it's a lot of exploration of the client's history. And while we're exploring the history, we provide a very safe, non-judgmental space for the client to explore his or her own past. And feelings are very complex. So a lot of the therapeutic intervention is to help the person feel and understand his or her own feelings. And thereafter, there is a lot of healing and release done through hypnotherapy, regression therapy, and inner child work. By literally this mid phase of therapy, the client is feeling a lot of peace and is ready to transform. Then comes phase two of therapy, which is essentially a lot of work with thoughts and changing behaviors. What I firmly believe, and I've experienced and I've seen with clients, is that between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies the power of our destiny. Because when we connect to that space and we realize that I have so many different choices in the way I can respond to the same event, I'm literally changing or creating a new reality. So this is essentially what we're doing in the clinic.
Lajja, that was so well explained. I'm a little curious to know, how did you decide to pursue hypnotherapy?
Okay, that's quite interesting. After I finished my master's in counseling psychology, I went to New York to do my developmental psychology. I've always been very passionate about children, and once I came back, I started working at a pediatric clinic for children who had emotional and behavioral disturbance. So whilst working with these children, it was so apparent and evident that almost, I would say, 80 to 90% of the behavioral and emotional issues in children are actually a result of faulty parenting and unhealthy child rearing environments. See, children are very weak and vulnerable. It's literally like clay that is in the hand of a potter, and it's how you're kind of molding it. So I started working with parents in my parental counseling sessions, and that's when I realized that most of the parenting practices which are faulty. Now it's interesting here, there are two broad reasons why there is unhealthy parenting that kind of happens. One is, it is a lot of how I was parented. That I will tend, or that will naturally be my most natural way of parenting. Okay, and here it's interesting to note that it can be an extreme. So what I mean is, for example, if I was beaten up frequently as a child, that's definitely unhealthy. However, when I have a child, either I will be inclined to beat up my child, or the other extreme is I will be overprotective and I will be a very permissive and a super nurturing parent. Both the extremes are not healthy for the child. So history kind of repeats in families. And a lot of these parents, they are not parenting in an unhealthy way because they don't want to parent in a healthy way. It's because they don't know how to. It's like they're wired. And this second part, which influences parenting, is a lot of the adult issues, which has nothing to do with kids, right? So I could be having an issue with my marriage. I could have very dominating in-laws, or a financial crisis, or a health issue. So a lot of the adult issues that parents are going through automatically or get displaced and transferred onto children. If I could give a little small example here, say there's a mother who has a very dominating mother-in-law who's constantly taunting her and is making life miserable for her. And the mother has a lot of frustration. However, because she cannot kind of answer back because of her own conditioning to the mother-in-law, there are very high chances, if she doesn't work with that disturbance and conflict, she may displace her anger and frustration onto her child and beat up a child when the child makes a mistake. So that's when I realized, or drew to me, that it became very evident to me that I need to work with parents and their environments to make some kind of a deeper, more meaningful impact with the children that I work with. Because come on, a child comes to us, to the clinic once a week for say 45 minutes to an hour maximum, and is spending 24 hours, 7 days a week at home in that environment. So of course therapy works most meaningfully, and there's a deeper impact if I can work with the parents and their issues. Hence I started researching meaningful ways to work with individual adults. That's when I stumbled upon hypnotherapy. It is one of the most, it's been a game changer for me in my clinic, and I'm able to impact people by working at a very deep core level of their essence and helping them transform from within, and thereby helping the kids that they're raising.
So Lajja, I feel so strongly about mental health, and I see the immense benefit one can gain by visiting a counselor. But there's so many people who still cringe at the thought of seeing one. Mm-hmm. So could you please elaborate for me the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist?
Yes, sure. So a psychiatrist is essentially an MBBS doctor, like your GP, right, who's gone ahead to do his master's, that is the MD program in the brain and neurotransmitters. So, and a psychologist, we are trained in human thoughts, feelings and emotions, how they develop and how we can work with them. So they're actually two pretty different, of course they're related, okay, and they're connected, but they're different. So you go to a psychiatrist for more clinical problems where the brain chemistry has been affected or changed. So they're like illnesses such as schizophrenia, you have OCD, there's bipolar disorder, depression, which is clinical. Right. You go to a psychiatrist. And for a counselor, the way I like to put it is for daily problems of daily living. things like anger, stress, relationship issues, low confidence. Who doesn't have that?
Right.
So that's when you go to a psychologist.
So in simple words, a psychiatrist will prescribe you medication, a psychologist will just work with your mind.
Absolutely. And here I would like to point, there are many times when a psychologist and a psychiatrist work in complementary with together. So let me give you a little example here. For example, if you and your friend go to eat pani puri on the road, right? Because your immunity is low, you might fall sick and get food poisoning. And your friend whose immunity is good may not fall sick.
Yeah.
So because you have food poisoning, you'll be puking and you'll have diarrhea. So what a psychiatrist would do is give you medication to stop that or to work with that. Whereas a counselor or a psychologist will work with your immunity. And immunity is made by several factors, right? It's what your mother ate when you were pregnant when she was pregnant with you, your lifestyle, your sleeping patterns, your diet, and even your stress levels. So as counselors and psychologists, we work with this whole gamut. Okay. Yeah, so I hope that helps.
Like I mentioned earlier, I was very fortunate to have attended your workshop on parenting, and I would love for my audience to know the importance of the years 0 to 8 and what parents can do to achieve optimal development.
This is actually a very complex question. I'm going to try my best to do justice here. So I'd like to answer this question in two parts. First is within the framework of the developing psyche. It's very important for parents to understand psychologically what's happening within 0 to 8, the period of 0 to 8. There are 3 or 4 points I would like to explain here to explain the psyche. So we're born as humanity, we're born extremely weak, vulnerable, dependent, and flailing. Even the strongest person, the strongest adult that you might know, Schwarzenegger, were currently extremely strong and powerful. When they emerged from their mother's womb, were how? Weak, flailing, vulnerable, dependent, and also a lot of helplessness. For example, if there's a dog coming to bite you and at a primal level you understand it's a threat, until your caregiver does not pick you up, you cannot save yourself. So this entire vulnerability and dependency is on home, the caregivers, and the environment. Second, to understand the developing mind is to understand the concept of fusing. So what I mean by psychological studies have shown that the infant or the newborn baby is essentially completely fused with the mother. The umbilical cord is not cut at birth because the child is still being breastfed, is still being carried, does not know how to walk, does not know how to talk. So he or she believes, literally truly believes that I'm one with my mother. And in this period of 0 to 8 is when identity and independence is slowly being formed. So we move from a state of complete dependency gradually to interdependence, and thereafter we fly off the nest and we're fully independent. Thirdly, just as it's important to know that just as we have physical needs of food, clothing, and shelter, we have deep psychological needs. And these needs are of love, connection, safety, security. There is this deep need of being held, of physical contact and touch. And lastly, there is this need of consistent, responsive caregiving. The last thing that you want to understand when you're looking at 0 to 8 is the brain. The child's brain is 3 to 4 times more densely packed with neurons than an adult brain. So what that means is that it is so rich, so wired, so intelligent, way more intelligent than an adult brain actually, and it's literally picking up everything from the environment. So this is the first part of my explanation, and keeping this model of the child's mind, I'd like to go on to explain certain pointers of what parents can do to ensure optimal development of their children. So first and foremost, of utmost importance is the connection or the bond, the parent-child bond and connection. This is the place, when I talk about the parent-child bond, I talk about things like attachment, security, connection, unconditional love and acceptance, and also physical presence and availability. Attachment and security is literally the key to almost, I would say, the strongest and the most important part of discipline. Thereafter comes being a healthy role model. So with children, hypocrisy doesn't work. You have to walk your talk. And I'd like to say values are caught and not taught. So it's extremely important to be a healthy role model yourself. I cannot beat up my child for getting angry. It just doesn't work. Hypocrisy does not work with children. So live that life. Be very aware that your child is observing, watching, and picking up and emulating everything that you're doing. Thirdly, comes this thing of setting limits and healthy authority. So here, I think parents need to really sit back and reflect, because the golden rule or the law is too much of anything is not good. So if the authority is too strict, very controlling and overbearing, it's naturally going to be rejected. And second comes this whole school of thought where parents are extremely nurturing, permissive, loving and caring, but it's too much. It's a bit too much. So the child has not really heard the word no. And if I've never heard the word no, because I've been over pampered and I've never really struggled for anything, or not even struggled, I've not even put effort before I could ask for it, it was made available to me. As an adult, I may grow up to be someone who can't say no to myself. And we all need to say no to ourselves. Who doesn't want to sleep in every morning? But you got to tell yourself, no, get up and get ready and go to work. Or after I've had one drink, I need to tell myself, stop, no, right? So it's really important to set healthy limits. I would say balance is the key, where you're not aggressive, nor are you permissive. You're just beautifully in charge and you're assertive. And you're also open to negotiation. So you work with the child. It's not my way or the highway. Thirdly comes the principle of, we call it emotional regulation. So what happens is, in children, the prefrontal cortex, now the prefrontal cortex is that part of our brain which is responsible for higher order functioning, such as logic, reasoning, decision making. All right, and we have within us the midbrain, and the midbrain is that part from which we have emotional responses. So in children, the emotional brain is extremely wired and the prefrontal cortex is weak. So they're not able to regulate their own emotions. All right, so when they feel anger or they feel anxiety, they are falling apart. At this time, what they need is, we call it co-regulation in the language of therapy. That is, they need a stable, sturdy caregiver who is firm and secure and grounded and is going to slowly teach the child how to regulate their emotions. So you do this by modeling, and you also do it by emotional coaching. It's a journey. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens literally through the period of 0 to 8. So it's a very famous proverb, and I like to use this when I'm talking to parents, that when little children are having big emotions, it's our duty to not join their chaos, but to share our calm. So it's a lot of how the adults are handling their own emotional responses and what are they doing when emotions are running high. That is a key. Okay. Then also we go on to this whole model of gradual transfer of responsibility. So you have a child who's weak, dependent, flailing, and doesn't have inner control. And you are the outer control. So as you're teaching the child, of course, firstly, you provide that safe and secure home environment with a lot of love, connection, warmth, happiness, that kind of stuff. Thereafter, you start teaching the child by being a healthy role model, setting authorities. Then becomes equally important to gradually, in an age-appropriate way, transfer responsibility. So it's almost like if a child is learning how to ride a cycle, it's an art to let go of the cycle at the right time. So gradually to transfer responsibility, to make them independent, to help, to empower them. Then also what's really important is the home environment. So as much as possible, it's healthy if the home environment is stable, peaceful and harmonious. Next comes the marital dynamics. So when I did my training in family therapy, I did this just a few years ago, and it's all about working with the child and the perspective of the family. One very important thing that we were taught in is that the marital couple, their strength, their harmony, their wavelength, the way they communicate with each other is super important for optimal development of the children. And seeing the parents together in a happy marriage, and I know that's may not be that hunky-dory and easy, but it's so important to work on it, because seeing their parents together and happy is a huge key for the child's mental health. So children who come from families where parents have had bitter fights, arguments, where they're constantly bickering, where they are, yeah, it's just unhealthy, the dynamic, and it leads to a lot of anxiety and unhappiness and misery in the child. Lastly, when we look at the the brain proliferation and the density of the neurons, we want to look at adequate environmental stimulation. So a part of optimal development is also to provide the child with, enough environmental stimulation. However, here I would like to make it a point to mention that a lot of parents today are overstimulating their child. What I mean is an overscheduling of classes, where they're just rushing from one class to the other. That actually is counterproductive, because intellectual growth happens within the framework of a strong socio-emotional bond. So if you're going to send your child to hours of chess class or badminton or music class, and it's happening at the expense of your connection with the child, then it's actually counterproductive. Lastly, I would like to draw parents' attention to the growing menace of today's society, that is screen time. So actually, cognitively, children are not able to discern between fact and fiction until the age of 5. So that monster that they're seeing on TV actually is real for them. And what is happening is the psyche is becoming weak. So what I recommend to parents is, as much as possible, keep your children away from any form of screen. Now this includes mobiles, iPads, televisions, video games, laptops, the works. From the age of 0 to 5 as much as possible, because apart from this imagination and fear thing comes the thing of the social exchange that is needed in relationships. When you're stuck on the mobile, definitely you're not learning the healthy give and take of a social interaction. Then comes the addiction to these screens, where these screens are highly addictive. We all are addicted to it. Let's accept it. We wake up in the morning and first thing we do is check our WhatsApp. So, and we didn't even grow up in a time when there was technology. So as much as possible, parents, keep your kids away from screens. And thereafter, when you do introduce screens, make sure you're monitoring the content that your child is viewing. That in a nutshell is just the key points that parents should keep in mind while raising their children.